All right, welcome to Brian for Liberty, and thanks for checking me out here on YouTube. I appreciate you stopping by. I do hope that you'll take a second and subscribe. As you can see, I'm struggling here on the subscriber numbers, and I'd love to get that up. So if you have a second, you like the content, please take a second to subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Also, you can check me out on Spotify at Brian for Liberty. I will be doing a broadcast tonight, separate from the YouTube broadcast that I normally do. Typically, what I do is I record the show and then I upload the audio to the podcast. I will do that. So if you want to check this out later and just listen to the audio, you can certainly do that. But I'm also going to be doing a separate podcast this evening, and I'm going to be reviewing an article written by a member of the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. He's the vice chair, Brian Deferding. Wrote a great article going over why the libertarian solution and essentially liberty and freedom are better solutions to crises than the authoritarian government intervention that we're seeing now. And that's an interesting perspective, and I think that a lot of people are pushing back against that idea and saying we have to do all these governmental things in order to protect the public. And even if I'm a small government conservative, I'm going to toss that belief aside when there's a situation that scares me, that's a crisis, or we're facing an emergency. All of a sudden now government is a better answer than markets and freedom, and I think that's a dangerous way to think. To that end, as a libertarian, my goals being here on social media, doing the YouTube channel, I'm on TikTok, I'm doing the podcast, I'm doing all these things. My goal is to do my best to provide an unbiased take on politics. I try and start there, okay? So my fundamental beliefs are in freedom and liberty, that government should engage with us as little as possible, that we should be free to live our lives however we see fit, as long as we're not interfering with anybody else's ability to do the same thing. That's my fundamental belief, and that's where I try and approach politics and news and what's going on in the world. I try and approach it from that perspective. So if I get called out and I'm wrong, I want to admit it. I want to say this was a mistake, I was wrong, whether I set aside my personal beliefs or my principles in the face of a crisis, or whether I put an angle on a story, or I come at a story from too biased of a perspective and I don't take the whole picture into consideration, and somebody reaches out and says, hey, look, you were wrong about this and here's why, and I do the research and it validates the fact that I was incorrect. I want to make sure that I'm taking a minute and I'm being unbiased and I'm being honest, and I sit here and I do something that you don't hear often from public people, personalities, whether it's media or politicians, and say, I was wrong, okay? And then again, I want to continue to explain why libertarianism and freedom and liberty are better solutions, both in regular times and when we're facing a crisis. So in order to do that, in order to get that message across, I have to come at this as unbiased as possible, and I have to be able to admit when I was wrong. So here is me admitting that I was wrong. I was wrong a few weeks ago when I talked about the government intervention and the shutdowns and those things being necessary and being justified to fight Corona, because at the time we didn't know what it was, and we had to take relatively extreme measures in order to safeguard people's health and well-being. Here's why I was wrong about that, okay? And I argued with other libertarians about it, and I'll be sharing this and the podcast with them so that they can, I'll be putting this up on my site, and I'll be tagging those people specifically so they can see that, hey, you know what, you were right, I was wrong, and I'm going to admit it. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is the risk you face from too much government is always going to be greater than the risk you face from too little. Okay, and that's the problem. That's what I forgot at the beginning of this crisis. First, I forgot that, of course, once government intervenes, there's going to be long-term structural changes. It's always going to happen, and the reason for that is government just can't help itself. Once they get a taste of a little additional power, a little additional authority, they're going to keep moving in that authoritarian direction. Second, we know the government's going to overreact. Now, how can I sit here and say government has the right and they should have shut down businesses and closed all these non-essentials and done all those things? How can I, as a libertarian, say that that's right, while at the same time trying to criticize government for all the spending that they're doing and all these other things that they're doing that I have been outspoken in opposition to, right? If I'm going to say that freedom and liberty are better solutions in a crisis or in freedom, then we have to acknowledge that there is a risk that we have to take to that. And I think that at the beginning of this crisis, I was a little blinded and had a blind spot caused by fear, maybe caused by a little panic. I was able to logically justify it in my own mind that, hey, this is going to be a short-term thing, and maybe if government could be relied upon to just do these things and short-term measures and to function properly, maybe there's justification for it, but no, there's just not. And at the end of the day, I stood by that, and I stood by it for a while, but as I'm watching what's happening in government, and I'm really sitting down and thinking about my own belief system, I set my own beliefs aside, and some of the other things I've said since then, quite frankly, make me hypocritical if I don't stand up and say, hey, I was wrong about this at the beginning. To that end, I got called out on another issue, so I have to revisit the Wisconsin primary. And I got sent a clip from a friend of mine from I think this guy's name is Dan Bongino, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I apologize, it's not intentional. And he is talking about the Wisconsin primary, and essentially what he's doing is he's being disingenuous, and he's coming at this in an angle that tries to deflect the blame off of the Republican Party for what they did. Okay, so he goes into this bit. The first bit is just flat out disingenuous. Here's the clip.
Those evil Republicans made people show up in the middle of this pandemic, despite the fact that it was dangerous, when we just could have delayed the election. And look at those evil Republicans on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They made people do it too. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be crystal clear. That is categorically false. Neither the United States Supreme Court, which ruled on it, nor the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which ruled on it, made any decision whatsoever about in-person voting. Listen to me, because this story won't make any sense for you. That is 1,000% true. There was no decision on in-person voting. In other words, for the liberals listening who are lying to themselves and to others, nobody in any court ruled yesterday that Wisconsinites had to show up to vote in the middle of a pandemic in person. Nobody. That was never, ever in the court case. Well, what was in the court case? Because again, we've been told the evil Republicans made people vote in Wisconsin. They could have got people killed. Totally, completely false. Let's go to this Wall Street Journal article, which lays it out nicely. By the way, I have another piece from Andy McCarthy, who's a little mad at me right now from National Review, but that's okay. I love Andy. In the show notes today, that is definitely worth your time if you want a detailed legal analysis too, from a professional attorney, what happened here. It's in the show notes.
So what he's essentially saying is he's right. I guess he's saying something that's accurate. Essentially what he's saying is that nobody forced anybody to go out and vote. Nobody said you have to go out and vote. He's right about that. Nobody's claiming that. Nobody's saying the Wisconsin court ruled that the only way you can vote is in person and you have to go out and vote. Nobody's saying that. That's not an accusation being made by the left. So that's just a disingenuous thing. He's saying that what you're hearing is false, and then he's using a false statement to validate that, right? He's saying what you're hearing is not true, and then he says something that nobody's hearing. Nobody's hearing anybody say you have to go vote. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's making that accusation. So it's very disingenuous, and it's the first attempt to try and take you down a road that misleads you in terms of what happened here in Wisconsin. The next thing he does is he goes into a lawsuit that is really separate from the issue that you're hearing about in the liberal media, right? So I've called out and I've beat up on liberal media on this YouTube channel quite a bit. I am not a lefty or a leftist or whatever, a Democrat, whatever you want to call it. That's not who I am. I will call out the left media. I think they've been overly harsh on Trump, blah, 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 blah. I've hit on those things. So what this guy is doing is he's taking a lawsuit, okay, that was a separate issue from what you're hearing about from the left-leaning media. And he's right. Stephen Colbert, he pulls up the Stephen Colbert clip, the same one that I used a couple of days ago when I criticized what the Wisconsin Republicans did. I used the same clip that he's using, okay? What he's doing is he's taking a different lawsuit, okay, a separate lawsuit, and he's ignoring the other lawsuit. Now, if you watch my video from 2 days ago, you'll see me criticizing Governor Evers in that video for waiting too long to do certain things. And one of those things is he wanted to delay the Wisconsin primary, like every other state has done, okay? And as a libertarian, you could say, no, he shouldn't be doing this. I think that the delay of voting is very much in line with my libertarian values, because I want as many people to have access to the polls as possible, and I don't want this issue, whether it's an overhyped media issue or whatever the case may be. I don't want this issue to keep people from going to the polls. And secondly, there's no question that this pandemic is affecting minority communities at a much higher rate than it's affecting. The studies are out there, and there's a lot of socioeconomic issues here when it comes to how something like this, a crisis, is going to affect vulnerable portions of our society. So even if the Republicans, this wasn't their intention, there's no way to get the stink off of the fact that this looks like voter suppression. This looks like you're trying to keep people from coming out and getting to the polls. So it's a bad look for the Republicans. But let's get back to the lawsuits. What he's talking about is a lawsuit filed by Democrats and ruled on by a Democrat judge. He's 100% accurate there. The Democrats filed suit. They sued. They were trying to get an extension on voting times. I agree with Mr. Bongino, and I'm probably crushing his name, on the fact that, no, you can't vote after the election day is over. That's a ridiculous request. The ruling by the Obama-appointed judge, and he should be complimenting the Obama-appointed judge, by the way, who stuck to the letter of the law and said, no, you can't extend the election beyond election day. So I'm perfectly fine with that. I think that's great. That was a good ruling. And again, I did criticize Tony Evers for this, but he did come in at the last minute and said, okay, by executive order, we're going to delay the primary. And I think that the Democrats there's some blame here on the Democrat side. I'm not arguing that. Like I said, I've said it before. There is blame on the Democrat side here. Tony Evers waited too long. But the lawsuit that they're talking about, when the Stephen Colberts of the world and the Trevor Noahs of the world are coming out and they're criticizing the Wisconsin legislature, which is Republican dominated, when they're criticizing the Wisconsin legislature, what they're doing is Evers came out too late, but he did come out and do an executive order to try and delay the actual primary. And the Republicans sued to block that. That is what they're talking about, okay? They're not talking about this first lawsuit. And if you listen to Mr. Bongino carefully, he touches on that very briefly and then moves right past it. He criticizes Tony Evers for doing it too late and then moves on, right? You have to address the actual issue. The issue is that the Wisconsin legislature stepped in when Governor Evers finally made the move to delay the primary. The legislature at that point stepped in and overruled that. That's what the Supreme Court ruled on. No, they didn't say you have to go out and admit your force. And I also said in my video from a couple of days ago that there's a large amount of personal responsibility here that Evers didn't delay the primary, so you had plenty of time going, saying, hey, this thing's probably going to happen when it's scheduled to happen. We should get absentee ballots. We should be prepared to vote absentee in the event the primary doesn't get delayed. So there is a personal responsibility there to make sure that you're in a position to vote absentee, and I acknowledged that 2 days ago. Governor Evers was wrong to wait so long, to wait till so late in the process to try and delay the primary. I also said that. So when you watch this Bongino and you watch the Republicans coming out and attempting to defend the Wisconsin Republicans, there's a little stink on that because they're trying to conflate two different things that are not really related to each other. I agree with the first lawsuit. That was stupid. The Democrats shouldn't have filed it. The Obama judge ruled correctly. I agree with all that. That's fine. That's a separate issue. The criticism of the Wisconsin Republican legislature is that they stepped in and blocked Evers' request to delay the primary. Now, let me also say this. The Wisconsin Republicans are going to say that he doesn't have the authority to do this, and that's why. And they had to protect the law. And let me tell you why that's hypocritical and disingenuous on the part of the Republicans. Right now, I don't have the right to peacefully assemble. You understand? If you're going to say that we have to defend the law, the supreme law of the land is the U.S. Constitution. I'm waiting, Republicans in Wisconsin, for you to file a suit saying the governor's declaration, the closure of non-essential businesses, the stay-at-home orders, all these different things are unconstitutional. He doesn't have the authority to do that. I don't care what the Wisconsin Constitution says. It can't overrule the federal Constitution. So every stay-at-home order, everybody who's getting fined for being out in public, for being in groups larger than 3, 5, or 10, or whatever the states, that's all illegal. It's all unconstitutional. So where are the Wisconsin Republicans? Are they standing up and defending my constitutional rights? No. And because they're not doing that, they are looking hypocritical. And because they're not doing that, it does look like all they were trying to do is suppress voters' rights, right? You have to be principally consistent. And if you're not, then even if your intentions aren't nefarious, they're going to get painted that way, and it's easy to do so. So shame on the Republicans, and shame on anybody out there in broadcast land who tries to conflate these two unrelated cases in a weak attempt to defend what Republicans did at the last minute. Okay, so that's where I'm at on this, and this is why this kind of stuff is super irritating, because you're going to get out there, and if you're a Republican who lives in a Republican echo chamber, guys like Bongino here are going to be able to trick you into thinking, oh, the leftist media is lying to you. Well, no, they're not. And look, this is right now I'm beating up on the right, and you'll see me beat up on the left. And if you look at my old videos, you'll see that I do try and be unbiased. But in this case, the Republicans were wrong. And now here comes the army of Republican broadcasters and Republican and right-leaning media to defend them. And that's every bit as bad as the left defending whatever nonsense authoritarianism the left is trying to get out there. So I wanted to revisit this. I didn't want to, but because of the pushback and because of the kind of the misrepresentation, I thought I would get in here and just clarify those points. And again, I also wanted to jump in here and say, yep, I was wrong at the beginning of this thing. We should not have been allowing government to usurp our rights. And hey, I'm waiting, Republicans. You want to uphold the letter of the law? Let's. Right now, my constitutional rights are being violated. I can't wait to see the Republicans file suit against Governor Evers to get the Wisconsin economy back to work and start throwing out any fine related to large gatherings or being out in public because of a stay-at-home order. So, hey, thanks for stopping by again. I hope you could take a second to subscribe to the channel if you like what I have to say. Go back and watch my old stuff. Call me out if you feel like I'm being biased. I enjoy it. I want to answer it. I'll do my research, and I'll try and come up with the best answer I can. And I will sit here and say that I'm wrong when I feel like I've made a mistake. So again, don't forget also to check out the podcast. There'll be 2 podcasts this evening, a rebroadcast of this show, and then of course I will be going over the article written by Mr. Defferding here in Wisconsin on the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin website. You can find that article. I'll be discussing that and why the libertarian solution in a crisis is better than the government solution. So thanks again, and we will see you guys next time.